Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives: jobs, incomes, debts, those we have, those coming down the road, and those facing our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life, and I'm ready and willing to go where the information takes me. Before we start, I want to make a few brief announcements. If you're interested in following this program and seeing the entire show as a television program, please go to website patreon.com. That's Patreon, patreon.com/economic update, and it's available to you whenever you want to see it. Likewise, please make use of our websites. These are ways for you to follow what we do, to communicate to us what you like and don't like, what you'd like us to cover in the weeks and months ahead. It's also the way to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and so on. It's a way also to partner with us, to share what we do with others. It's available, both these websites are available 24/7 and no charge whatsoever. The first is rdwolf with 2fs.com, and the second one is Democracy at Work. That's all one word, democracyatwork.info, I-N-F-O. Finally, we are now represented by a speakers bureau called Speak Out Now, and you can find out more about us and them at speakoutnow.org. And if you want to communicate with them about arranging for a time and date for me to come to where you are to give a talk, etc., just contact them through email at info@speakoutnow.org. So let's turn to our updates. The first one is a remarkable piece of work, and I am really happy to be able to share it with you. It was a study, an in-depth study of 3,066 workers here in the United States, drawn from all kinds of jobs in all parts of the country. The research was put together by the Rand Corporation, a famous research outfit, Harvard Medical School, and the University of California at Los Angeles. It's called the American Working Conditions Survey. And boy, did it come up with some results, and it's important to understand. These are results based on direct discussions, questionnaires, and follow-ups with over 3,000 American workers. I'm going to go through the conditions and then talk about what they mean. 1 in 5 American workers said the following: that they face a hostile or threatening environment at work that could include sexual harassment and bullying. Workers who have to face customers endure even more abuse than those who don't. Nearly 55% of American workers in this survey said, quote, that they face unpleasant and potentially hazardous conditions. 3/4 say they spend at least a fourth of their time on the job in intense or repetitive physical labor. Telecommuting is rare, even though you hear a good bit about it. 78% of the workers said they were required to be physically present in their workplace throughout working hours. Only 38% say their jobs offer good prospects for advancement, and the older they get, the smaller the percentage say they have any chance for advancement. Half of American workers say that they work on their own time because they have to meet the demands of their job. And more than a third of workers have absolutely no control over the schedule of the tasks they are assigned to do. The lead author of the study is Professor Nicole Maestas, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, who is an economist at the Harvard Medical School. She added some more information that I want to share with you. It's a very interesting set of results here. Fewer than half the men without a college degree can take a break when they want to. Fewer than half. Whereas men with a college degree can take a break when they want to 76% of the time. Here's another one. 68% of men without a degree spend at least a fourth of their time moving heavy loads. This is really extraordinary. And it's extraordinary in a number of ways I want to bring to your attention. For the 300 years that the capitalist system has been the dominant way we go about producing goods and services, we have had a really impressive list of technical changes, technical progress. We have machines now that can do the labor that used to be drudge work for human beings. Lots of those developments over 300 years. Every one of them was justified and often intended by the inventor to be exactly that, a way to make less work necessary and to make the work we do less arduous, less demanding, less stressful. But the reality is, at the end of 300 years, in the country that's one of the most industrial and technologically advanced, we have results of the sort I just talked to you about. That's itself perhaps the most important implication of these studies. But there are more. One of the most stunning things about the collapse of our economy in 2008 and 9, that we're still working our way out of, one of the most stunning results has been the decline in what is called labor force participation. What this simply means is the percentage of adults that are either working or looking for work, as opposed to people who are not working and are not anymore looking, if they ever did. We have seen a remarkable and historically unusual drop in labor force participation. Millions of American workers who 9 or 10 years ago were either working or looking for work are today neither working nor looking for work. And the question has befuddled economists, psychologists, and others, why is this happening? Well, as the Harvard professor says, it's probably because the quality of the job has deteriorated. The demands on you, the time pressures, the stressors, the physical and mental arduousness of the work is getting worse, not better. Defying not only the technical advances that could relieve us of this, but also the basic humanity of what it means to go to work. So maybe, says the Harvard professor, that's why millions of people have decided to do something else or to try to find a way to live that doesn't involve an engagement in workplaces that have the conditions discovered by this survey. In her closing comment, the lead author of this study, Professor Maestas, said, quote, "There's a message for employers here. Working conditions really do matter." To which my response is, well, I'm sure they do, but in a society and in a system that makes profit the number one objective, that says that the bottom line is how much profit you make, is it really surprising that if you can earn more money by squeezing your employees, you will do so? I'm reminded of my latest airline trip. I came back from Canada a few days ago and discovered once again what airlines are really good at: squeezing the human body into an ever smaller and less comfortable space than we had 6 months or 6 years ago. The bottom line. The bottom line. I want to turn next to a story that may alarm you, and if it does, well, I'll admit it. That's part of the purpose. The capitalist economy that we live in has been around, as I said, about 300 years. And whenever it arrives in a place where we didn't have capitalism before, it not only organizes production in its distinctive way, not with masters and slaves, not with lords and serfs, but instead with employers and employees, wherever capitalism comes, it displays this remarkable pattern. Every 4 to 7 years, on average, it goes through a cycle. We call it the business cycle, a period of time when economy is working well, jobs are being filled, incomes are rising, followed by the downturn, the recession, the depression. We have a lot of words for this because it's so recurring. And it goes on, as I say, every 4 to 7 years. That doesn't mean every one is 4 to 7 years. Some are shorter and some are longer. 4 to 7 is the average. Well, if you use that average and you remember that the last downturn in this economy was in 2008 and 9, well, then if you do the math, we're kind of due. And economists are more and more coming out with predictions that we are going to see an economic downturn really soon. Soon can mean 6 months, soon can mean 18 months. It's in that range, and it's being expected. In the middle of August, the Bank of America, one of the leading researchers into this question, issued an alarm, a warning, that the signs were there as far as they were concerned, that an economic downturn was coming. But it's not about the downturn that I want to talk to you today. I've talked about the instability, this cyclical bouncing around of the capitalist economy in the past. No, this time I want to talk to you about what is emerging as a strategy for what the government should do when that downturn comes. And the big signal was given by a professor at Harvard, Rogoff, and he wrote that what he thinks we would have to do is we have to become comfortable with using a tool we haven't wanted to use and have very rarely used so far in American history. And that tool is negative interest rates. So I need to talk to you briefly to make sure we all understand what it means, what it is, and what effects it will have. So first, what is a negative interest rate? Well, it's the opposite of a positive interest rate. Here's how that works. If you have a positive interest rate, let's say you lend $100 to somebody, they have to pay you back at the end of the year, for example. They have to give you back the principal, that's the 100 you lent to them, plus an interest payment, say 5% for the sake of argument. So you get back $105 at the end of the year. That's $100 of loan plus 5% positive interest rate. What then would a negative interest rate mean? Well, let's assume it's negative 5%. It would mean that I lent you $100, and at the end of the year, you give me back $95. In other words, a negative interest rate means you get back less than you lent to the person. Why would a government impose a negative interest rate on the economy? Or why would banks reduce interest not just to zero, but further into negative territory? The answer is the following. The government wants people to take their money out of the bank where it sits and does nobody any good, and not in a loan. They want that money to be spent on building things, buying things, hiring people. They want to get the economy going again, especially in an economic downturn. So the hope is by lowering interest rates so that keeping your money in the bank literally makes you lose that money, slowly but steadily, that people will be so horrified at the thought that they're not only not earning interest, they're losing money, that they will spend it instead. Here are the two implications of all of this I want you to think about, besides trying to digest the idea. First, the logic is flawed, because if people think that the economic situations that we face are so bad that the economy is going to go down, 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 they are not going to take their money out of the bank and use it to hire people to make more goods, because they don't believe they can sell those goods when they get ready to be sold. That's how bad they think the economy is. It would be better for people like that to leave the money in the bank losing 5% than to take all that money, throw it into production, and lose it or risk losing a great deal more than 5%. So if the view of investors and of businessmen and women is that the economy is in trouble, they're not going to borrow that money and spend it even if the interest rates are negative. That's one problem with this idea. Second problem, millions of Americans, especially in a country like ours where the age of our population is rising, millions of people in their elderly period of time can't possibly live on what Social Security pays them, and therefore rely on whatever savings they've accumulated in their lifetime to pay them some interest by being invested in a savings account or a certificate of deposit or things like that. If we have negative interest rates, all of those people will not only not earn anything by the savings they've accumulated and deposited in a savings bank or a certificate of deposit. Not only will they earn nothing, they will see the value of what they've saved diminish year in and year out, because that's what a negative interest rate does. What in the world are we saying and doing to the elderly part of our population by seriously entertaining a regime of negative interest rates to deal with the instability of the capitalist system? I won't answer the question. It kind of answers itself. My next economic update is very brief. And before I tell you what it is, I want to tell you what it means. We usually do it in the reverse order. What it means is that more and more, as a number of people have noticed, we are splitting into the haves and the have-nots in a way that this country hasn't seen for a century. A relatively small part of the population gathering into its hands a disproportionate amount of the wealth, and everybody else scrambling, some desperate, some not yet desperate, some hoping not to become desperate. And as that split deepens, it shows up in a million little places, and one such place I want to tell you about because it erupted earlier in the month of August. Where did it erupt? In the relatively small town of Lakeland, Florida. And here's how it worked. The schools there, I suppose it's the county, I'm not sure, someone can let us know through the website what it is. They're called the Polk Schools, after the president, P-O-L-K. The Polk Schools in Lakeland, Florida, came up with a fundraising letter that was sent to the parents of the children in this public school. Turns out that the children line up for lunch every day to get their lunch in the middle of the day. And they line up in the normal way children line up, and they wait in line in turn to get their lunch. But they were offered a new deal. If the children's parents kick in $100 for the fundraiser, their children will not have to wait in line. They will go to the front of the line and get their lunch ahead of all the other kids. That way it'll become really clear to the children who's got the money, or whose parents do, and who doesn't. We can have those children who have to wait because they don't have enough money to get lunch in the normal way. Well, I'm happy to tell you that the parents, led by a few courageous parents, went ballistic. Thought this was the worst conceivable way to divide, humiliate students that they had ever heard of. They fought it, and it was defeated. And I'm very glad of the defeat, and I'm proud of those parents. But besides shouting out, good for you, I do want you all to think about what it means that a perfectly reasonable group of administrators and parents and teachers could have come up with the idea that if you've got money, your kid gets to eat lunch by being bounced in front of all the other kids waiting, just like your child used to do. In the time we have left, I want to spend time on something that's becoming more and more an article of conversation where I think I can perhaps be of some use. Probably mostly out of the confrontation in Virginia earlier in August, the confrontation that saw a young woman tragically killed by a right-wing extremist driving his car intentionally into a crowd of people. And in reaction, the remarkable statements of the President of the United States. There has become interest in who were the people who committed this crime, why were they there? And I'm not going to go over the details. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with them. But in that conversation, what we got was also a discussion of white supremacy, of neo-Nazi, and therefore of the term fascism. Now, there are lots of different definitions of fascism. It's a word that was, of course, very important in the middle of the last century when there were 2 or 3 or 4 governments in the world that were controlled by, run by people who took the name fascism as a compliment. I'm thinking of Adolf Hitler in Germany, Benito Mussolini in Italy, the leaders of Japan and Spain, and so on. Portugal also belongs in this list. And so some people mean fascism when there are uniformed gangs in the street fighting each other. Some people mean it as a kind of general political extremism, authoritarianism, and so on. I'm not quarreling with or discussing those definitions, but I want to talk to you about what the term means in economics. Fascism is a particular way, whatever else it is, of organizing an economy. So I'm going to give you a summary so you can have it in your mind and make your own judgments about whether what is emerging in the United States is a genuine movement for fascism, and if you believe it, who's doing it, and in what way, and for what ends. So let me tell you about fascism, using as the classical example that in Germany, the government under Adolf Hitler, which runs roughly from 1933, when he ascends to the position of power in Germany, to 1945, when he loses World War II and either takes his own life or is killed. No one will ever know for sure. Fascism is the name of a system that is capitalist in its core, that is, it is organized by enterprises that produce goods and services that are owned and operated by investors, a relatively tiny minority of the population, which employs the vast majority as workers in these enterprises. Should be quite familiar to all of you. But what happens to make a capitalist system go fascist, become fascist, is that it can't reproduce itself in the usual way. It can't rely on workers coming to work every morning. It can't rely on the interaction among companies being such that they can reproduce themselves and keep going. It can't function in the normal market exchange system. It's run out of gas. It has encountered severe problems. Just to give you an idea, suppose the mass of workers in a capitalist economic system decided, for whatever reason, that they were not satisfied with being employees, that they didn't accept the wages they were offered, the working conditions they lived under, the power they did or didn't have, and they simply said, we're not going to work for you anymore. The system comes to a complete stop. It can only work if working people come to work each morning and do their thing and go home in the evening and reproduce themselves and sleep and eat and come back the next day and do it all again. If something were to block those workers or undermine those workers, the system couldn't work. The same applies if the companies can't sell what they produce. If there isn't a market for it, they die. When the conditions of a capitalist system become unmanageable, then sometimes, not necessarily, but sometimes, the solution found is to have the business community, in effect, merge with the government. Make the government the enforcer. Have the government play the role of making sure all the different parts are needed. So let's take the German example. In the years leading up to 1933, the working class in Germany more and more joined and supported both the socialist and communist parties in Germany. They were very powerful. And it was becoming clear to the business community that they faced a danger, that the socialist and communist parties, and remember, Germany is quite close geographically to Russia, which had already had this kind of revolution just a few years before that. The fear of the German business community, particularly the biggest businesses, was that they were running into an impossibility for continuing because they had a working class that was committed to their end, who were socialists and communists, didn't want capitalism to survive. The business community, therefore, decided to make common cause with the only large organization that had masses of people in it that they thought could give them enough political clout to force the system to work. And that organization was the Nazi Party, organized by Adolf Hitler. And so a deal was struck between Mr. Hitler and his political party and the big business community. We will create a merged government, a government in which business and the government work hand in hand. Hitler comes to power. The first thing he does is go after the communists and the socialists, transforms all the trade unions into government-run unions so that none of those forces can block the reproduction of the capitalist system. Fascism is that coming together of the business community and the government to together dictate, and I mean the word dictate, exactly what happens in the economy, because they can't see any other way of getting the system to survive. So I leave it to you to ask whether you see in our society movements in that direction, and coming from where and going where. We will be returning to this question as it becomes relevant to American life. We've come to the end of the first half of this program. Please stay with me. We will be back in a very short time.